Hey guys, today I'm interviewing two healthcare professionals who are really a breath of fresh air. Why? They share something in common with me in that their mindset is the following. Your body is perfect. It wants you to heal and to be strong and feel good, period. That's pretty wonderful coming from healthcare professionals, one of whom is a physician's assistant, the other one of whom works at a major hospital as a nurse in their cardiology unit. Together, Jordyn and Karmen have formed a health organization or a clinic called Selkirk. You can look it up later if you're interested. And again, the topics we're going to be discussing in this interview, I think, are very, very relevant to what we care about here on this channel. The first one is, why are you aging faster than you need to? The second topic that we're going to cover in here is, what is the impact of sugars and carbs, what I call peasant food, upon your heart? Number three that we're going to get into is genetics. What role do they play in your health as you age? Turns out the answer is about, spoiler alert here, gentlemen, the answer is about 5% only. That's right. You can blame your genetics for about 5% of what you become in time, and we'll get into that as to why. And finally, Karmen is going to give us a really wonderful example of one of her clients who made a strong decision, implemented some simple changes powerfully, and within a matter of months had turned his life around in a positive way in terms of his health and his outlook. So enjoy.
I'm a clinical nutritionist, so I've worked in nutrition for almost a decade at this point, and I got my bachelor's in nutrition and dietetics from University of Idaho, so local, and then got my master's in nutrition down at Spokane University, and I'm finishing my PhD in nutrition at Selkirk University as well, and should finish in May. So, and I specialize in perinatal and fertility nutrition. So I love working with babies. I love working with moms. I've had a ton of success with altering their diet and just kind of changing some of that nutrition and lifestyle things to help get them pregnant. So that's kind of the career background.
Huge. Family oriented, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Jordyn.
Me,
Jordyn.
I'm Jordyn.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for
I am, I've also been in healthcare it was 10 years last month, which feels surreal. So I started off as a nurse. I've worked in cardiac medicine almost my entire career. I'm super fascinated by basically anything that has to do with the heart. I think it's kind of an interesting organ in that it's complicated and we kind of identify it as sort of who we are in a way. So anyways, I did that. I worked in critical care, went back to school to get my master's degree, and have been a nurse practitioner for 2.5 years. I've worked in heart failure cardiology and transplant cardiology, and then most recently have just been studying women's health and started Selkirk Women's Health with Karmen. So
Selkirk.
yeah, Selkirk Women's Health. So yeah, that's kind of a passion project turned reality, and have been kind of just delving into that space lately.
So nice.
That's me.
That's us. That's us.
That brings up a question. Do either of you, or maybe start with Jordyn on the cardiology side, have interesting stories of either the goods or the bads of people who've gone in with an issue and it either come out better, or some unfortunately don't come out at all, because once your ticker's in that issue, you may just not emerge. Do you have?
Yeah, so one of the big reasons that I feel like I'm stepping back from kind of modern medicine, so to speak, is because it's all reactive. It's like we're just taking care of stuff after the problem has been there for probably a while. There's not a lot of resources that go into preventative medicine or identifying early disease and treating it. And so, I think a lot of people continue to do their lifestyle habits that aren't conducive of cardiac health because you can get away with it for decades. And then once you have it, oftentimes it's too late. You're in trouble. And so in the cardiac world, coronary artery disease is probably the one I see the most. that is preventable. Like that doesn't necessarily have to happen. That's high cholesterol, that's bad diet, that's high blood pressure, it's diabetes that's untreated or uncontrolled. Lots of processed, saturated, fatty foods, I think, contribute to that as well. But like the wrong kinds, right? The over-processed, bad stuff. I think there's been a lot of research that, the more natural occurring fats are better and don't cause the same cardiovascular ramifications. So a lot of times by the time patients get to me, they've been smoking, they have bad diabetes that's been uncontrolled, and they've been getting maybe some primary care from a family medicine doctor who tells them to do these things, but those things don't really actually ever get done because it's on the patient. It's on the patient to quit smoking. It's on the patient to, kind of take responsibility for those things. And then they come to me. By the time they see us, they usually have like end-stage coronary artery disease that is either remedied by open heart surgery, and then
wonderful.
You hope, you hope that you get 10 years out of those grafts, or stents, which again, you hope you get 10 to 15 years out of the stents, maybe. We have an interventionalist on our team that does a lot of in-graft stenosis, so like having to go back in and re-stent stents because the disease is still so aggressive.
Karmen, because Jordyn is mentioning that naturally occurring fats we're starting to see are way better. Is there a difference between naturally occurring fats and crappy fats? What is that from your experience in medicine?
Yeah, totally. So with the naturally occurring fats versus the biggest issue when it comes to coronary heart disease, in a subpopulation, so about 20 to 30% of the population has a certain gene mutation. It's called the ApoE gene, where they can't process dietary cholesterol correctly. And so they actually have to be conscientious of whether it's coming from good, bad, or indifferent cholesterol-rich foods, because that actually elevates their cholesterol levels, making them more susceptible to coronary artery disease. So in people that are not part of that subcategory, they have to be conscientious of inflammatory oils, so refined seed oil, so canola oil, cottonseed oil, peanut oil, soybean oil, all these ones that are used in processed foods that create inflammation in the body and therefore turn into either elevating their cholesterol levels because it's creating inflammation, not because it's a fat source, or creating triglycerides or what have you on those. But the people with the ApoE gene, they even have to be careful of the healthy saturated fats like butter and coconut oil and animal-based fats, because those do elevate their, cholesterol levels as well. Everyone else, doesn't have to be as conscientious, but the fats that are always healthy for everyone across the board, regardless of their genes, are monounsaturated fats, and those would be like avocado oil, olive oil, those types of oils. And then based off of that, we have to watch heat and temperature. So you don't want to heat olive oil. That's an anti-inflammatory fat, but if it's heated higher, and then avocado oil can tolerate high heat.
But that's kind of a nice pearl. You're saying everybody, regardless of their genetic background, should be actually eating plenty of olive oil, not cooking in it, but plenty of olive oil.
Yeah, plenty of olive oil.
On a daily basis even.
Yep, that's why the most highly researched diet on the planet is the Mediterranean diet, and we've seen huge cardiovascular benefits to that.
Yeah,
and
we actually recommend it, even in modern medicine, we recommend the Mediterranean diet for patients.
Beautiful, so there's no debate on that, which is nice.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, like we know that once everybody agrees on.
Yep.
Yeah. But outside of that, saturated fat like butter and coconut oil aren't a huge issue for people that don't have that genetic predisposition.
So for most people, those are going to be good fats, most, but not all. And it's called the ApoE gene.
Yep.
Those folks have to be a little cautious. And what is it that goes up specifically on the cholesterol for those people who have that genetic predisposition?
So it's the lipoprotein A, so the smaller particle size, which is the more problematic. It's more likely to get stuck in the lining.
Is that a subset of the LDL or something else?
It's the LDL.
Yeah, it shows up on your LDL, elevated LDL.
Which is the more quote unquote problematic, but it's just looking at this is Jordyn's bread and butter, but the particle size, which makes a difference in what it looks like in the arteries. So the HDL, we call them like fluffy buoyant, so they just bounce around in the arteries, and the smaller ones like to get stuck and then they become problematic.
Those are the ones that can create the blockages and then thereby coronary artery
The bad
disease.
ones, which is LDL that you're looking at.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
They're-
I had a question, Jordyn, when you were mentioning
Yeah.
these people who go on for decades living a certain way,
Yeah.
not the best or
Yeah.
unhealthy way. How do I know if I'm one of those persons? Are there symptoms in advance? Is it somebody you fall off a cliff one day after you've been abusing your body for a long time? Is it age related? Like, oh shit, like me, I just turned 50 recently.
Yeah.
Oh no, now I'm about to, get my report card, so to speak, of what
how have I been doing for the
Yes.
last 30 years? Yeah, I mean, I think that it varies, of course, because everybody's genetics are different, right? So if you don't have a genetic predisposition to coronary disease or heart disease, I would say that, there are some people that kind of can live this way for a period of time and then they do fall off the cliff, and that cliff looks like they have a heart attack, they have a stroke, or they have some other massive, arterial problem. Like I've seen patients who are smokers and their first presentation of artery disease is actually blockages in their legs that then cause significant leg pain with activity. Then you of course go looking, and of course they have coronary disease too, but what's incredible about the heart is that if like your arteries around your heart, if one of the main ones starts to become occluded, the other two will kind of take over and make these collateral vessels that get bigger. And so sometimes people don't always present with coronary artery disease first because there's this really incredible mechanism in place to try to protect you from yourself in a way. And then there's other people who just kind of slowly walk into it. But I would say, those people are the ones who come in later, and they're often, unfortunately, so diabetics don't feel pain like most people do because of the nerve damage that occurs from high blood sugars.
Oh,
and so
it's
they
called
won't,
neuropathy?
Yeah, neuropathy. So they won't have your classic chest pain like a normal non-diabetic patient would. Yeah, so they'll feel like nauseous, fatigued, a little off, maybe more short of breath than usual, but none of that pain, crushing chest pain with it radiating down my arm and my jaw. And I've seen this in the movies. I know what this is. It's a lot more insidious. And so then they'll come in and they'll actually have horrific 3-vessel disease that we can't do anything about because it's too late, and it's so occluded from we'll say proximal to distal, meaning the beginning of the artery all the way down to the end is so lumpy bumpy, which is a very medical term, but it's so damaged, and so and they atrophy too, so those vessels will actually start to shrink over time.
So they're blocked and shrinking.
Correct. And so then those patients kind of will, by the time they get diagnosed with that, they often then also have heart failure, which is when the pumping function of your heart actually is now compromised and reduced. It kind of depends on what you have in your patient profile. So if you have a non-diabetic smoker, I would say you're more likely to fall off that cliff and present suddenly with an acute event. If you're a diabetic with high blood pressure who doesn't smoke, you may present more slowly over time, if that makes sense.
Well, and there is, and I want you to explain this, Jordyn, when you talked about reactive medicine, there's lots of blood tests we can look at 10, 20 years in advance to say we're seeing like an increase in inflammation. And we practice integrative medicine, so we're looking at getting ahead and being proactive. So what tests would you test to get ahead of coronary artery disease?
Lipid panels are helpful to see, what your cholesterol, your LDL, your HDL, and just what that chemistry profile looks like in your blood.
What are you looking at there? Are you looking at the ratio of tris to HDL, or do you need to go down to the micro level and the fluffiness of the LDL molecules?
Yeah, it's so in modern medicine, and Karmen can maybe speak to this a little bit more from the more integrative side, but for me, if you have a cholesterol over 200,
total cholesterol,
and an LDL over 100, I'm putting you on a statin, period. Because there's a lot of research that shows that an LDL greater than 100 is associated with higher coronary vascular risk. However, I think with some of the other stuff we know now in integrative nutrition, I have an elevated LDL, but I eat a lot of avocados and olive oil and grass-fed meat. And so I think it's all in context. But specifically for me, I'm looking at your LDL HDL ratio as a cardiology nurse practitioner.
What number are you looking at there? What ratio?
Boy,
I usually do a 4-to-1.
yeah, it should be 4-to-1.
L to H.
Correct.
At most
Yeah.
should be 4/1.
Yeah.
4/1.
Yeah.
So 200 versus 50.
Correct. Yeah.
Something like this
Yeah.
would be the max, or 160 over 40. I got it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I also think it's helpful, like Karmen was mentioning, to check inflammatory markers. We can check for the alpha poietin E.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You can see which number it is.
Yeah. So you can see how, elevated or not that protein is.
What's that called? Alpha?
Alpha poietin E.
Okay.
Right? Did I say that right?
And then
I should know that.
dependent on the gene, so there's like 1, 2, 3, and 4. Like if someone's a 3-4 genetic SNP, they're much more have an elevated coronary artery disease as well as dementia and neurodegeneration, because what we know is those types of proteins aren't just cardiovascular specific, so it can make you more
So it's brain too?
so it puts you at an increased risk. So I always tell people that the genes load the gun and then your lifestyle fires it.
Trigger, yeah.
So you can have that genome and it's really great to know your genes, but then dependent on your lifestyle, it could be turned on or turned off dependent on what you're doing. So
Yeah.
Jordyn could have ApoE 3-4 and never get Alzheimer's and never get coronary artery disease because she's aware of that and she alters her lifestyle based off of that.
That's encouraging.
So, and that's really, from nutrigenomics is kind of a newer field in clinical nutrition, and that really says that genes is about 5%, lifestyle is about 95%, and that really starts in utero,
Sure.
with babies as well, but yeah, inflammatory markers,
lipid panel, and
insulin.
Depending, you can check, diabetes, trying to think of some of the others.
CRP, homocysteine, those are inflammatory markers.
You two have want me getting all this stuff checked, and I will check it
I
next
was gonna
couple of
say,
weeks.
and the other thing,
Because this is fun.
Yeah, it's super interesting.
Well, Jordyn thinks of any other markers. Another really cool one that they put out from imaging is you can get a coronary artery scan to get a numerical value on how clear your arteries are.
It's a coronary calcium CT scan.
And you can get that done at Inland Imagery, and it's, I believe, right around $125, and you don't need a referral.
That's incredible.
I know, isn't that crazy?
You don't need a referral, and so that's a really proactive, like my dad had 2 heart attacks last year, and if he would have had the coronary artery scan, we could have caught it way before, and then you start making lifestyle changes.
Yeah.
And so Inland Imagery does that, and you don't need a referral letter.
Yeah.
For that.
Pretty interesting.
It's a super
Yeah, we use that. It's a good non-invasive test to see.
You just lie down and they take a picture?
Yes,
That's
it's essentially it, yeah. It's like a 15-minute MRI. You lay in a tube, it's super quick.
Beautiful. Because I think my heart's in good shape, but I don't know for sure. It would be nice to know.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I would say that's probably the majority. Obviously then, for overall health, checking, your blood counts and a chemistry panel, make sure your kidneys and liver are functioning. But as far as cardiac, initial workup goes, those are kind of the markers I would look for.
Last one on this issue of the cardiac, because it's fascinating. How does high sugar or diabetes or prediabetes affect the heart? They seem so unrelated. Like I think of diabetes as the guy who loses his toes or his foot because unfortunately it doesn't circulate down to the blood, and so he's amputee. But what's the heart got to do with it?
Well, if you think of it in the same way, really, the reason you lose your feet and your toes is because you're getting vasoconstriction over time. So high blood sugars cause inflammation. Over time, that wears down, the nerves and the small arteries and vessels in your feet, your hands. I think the easiest place for it to happen is in your feet. But that same principle applies to the rest of your body when you have diabetes. So then it can cause the arteries and veins around your heart also to atrophy, which means to get small. And so you'll look at an angiogram of a healthy patient who does not have diabetes and they have these big full, you can shoot them with dye and see on the screen these big open, kind of engorged arteries. And then with diabetics, we often call them spidery. They're like little spider legs. They're very narrow, they're very small, and there's a bunch of little ones. And so over time, diabetic vasculopathy is a terrible thing to have if you're talking about the coronary arteries, because you can't stent them. You can't bypass them. And so then they ultimately end up getting heart failure and potentially can go on to transplant or mechanical heart, but that's like such a small percentage of people. So really, if you have severe end-stage diabetic vasculopathy, it's a bad thing to have because it's hard to treat. And there's really not a great option for it.
Now, for those of us who aren't that far yet, but maybe are in the danger zone, what does the danger zone look like? Is there a way I can measure it? Do those blood testers for the sugar mean anything? Or do I have to go to the doctor? Or what should I look at?
Get your blood sugar under control.
Okay.
It's that simple. I mean, and then also, I think having your like if you are diabetic and you're like, oh my gosh, how is my cardiac health? I can tell you this, if your diabetes has been out of control for 5, 10, 15 years, you probably have already some vascular changes. The best thing to do is to get on top of your blood sugar levels and to aim for a hemoglobin A1C less than 7. That's what we try to get all of our cardiac patients to, a hemoglobin A1C less than 7. There's some really good drugs out there that help, but also, lifestyle change is the biggest.
How about for normal people who aren't diabetic yet? What should we be aiming for on you said it's the A1C?
Yeah,
under 5.
Under 5.
So optimal would be between 4 and 5. I technically think of someone as pre-diabetic over 5.5. So that's looking at the last 3 months of your glucose average. And then we always want to look at insulin level as well. Insulin is looking at how much your pancreas secretes insulin to modulate your blood sugar to keep it tightly regulated. And so we want to look at insulin level. And then, we've been using, you can take test strips, you can test it in the morning to see, or you can use a continuous glucose monitor that are becoming really popular to see what your blood sugar goes in between. You should be, ideal for women, it should be between 70 and 85 to decrease any risk of any hormone-related cancers. And I would say I would keep men under 85 as well. And so the process that's happening that's creating the coronary artery disease is something called advanced glycation end product. So when insulin is high and when glucose is high, it makes all your proteins really sticky. And it's essentially, the way that I like to think about it is because it says advanced glycation end products is what's the pathology of what's happening is it's aging your body on a physiological level faster, which is then creating disease that then Jordyn sees 10 to 15 years later. And so really when we thought about heart disease back in the 1980s, we were thinking, oh my gosh, these arteries are full of cholesterol. And so they thought, well, cholesterol and fat is the issue. And then we took fat away and replaced it all with sugar, and now heart disease is the #1 killer of women and men. And so fat isn't the issue, and so now we need to look at how do we tightly regulate blood sugar levels. That doesn't mean that we can't have any carbohydrates, but what works for you? Are you consuming enough protein with your carbs? Are you eating and then are you snacking all day? That's going to elevate your insulin all day long. Are you eating breakfast? Do you eat enough protein in the morning? What does the rest of your day look like? What is the composition? How much lean muscle mass do you have? That affects how well you metabolize glucose. So there's all these different things that, you really either need to do a lot of self-experimentation or work with a nutritionist like myself to figure out what works for your body. And then your body just needs change over time. So, how do we know when you potentially
age hormones,
age hormones, life stage, goals, health goals, if you have certain ones. But really your A1C should be under 5.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm there yet. So
that's good.
That's okay. We're working on it.
Yeah.
We're working on it.
Yeah.
There's still time. Oh, last question on this. Do you have any cool anecdotes of people who turn things around, who were obviously not on a transplant list, but then it's too late, but people who are worried, scared, concerned, and then they did something. What? What have we seen?
I actually have a really cool testimonial of, I had this patient, so I don't work with a ton of men because our specialty is women's health.
Fertility, women,
Fertility, women's health. But I had this patient that came in, and I actually am his doctor. His GP is a friend of mine. And so he said, you got to go in and see Karmen. And he was highly skeptical of nutrition. He had elevated triglycerides, he had elevated LDL, he had high cholesterol, he had high sugar levels. You know, he worked for Microsoft for his whole career. He was a computer scientist, so he sat at a desk and ate whatever was able to eat. So he was 65, just retired, and was like, okay, I guess I need to get a handle on this. So so he had tried vegan and vegetarianism. His blood work got worse. And
what was he presenting, by the way, Karmen? Not to cut you off. What did he come in with?
He just was tired, but I mean, he had all these elevated blood markers.
Okay.
So high cholesterol, elevated, so all of these things he was on his way to heart disease, essentially, and diabetes. He was pre-diabetic. So he came in, he wasn't eating any meat, and he was anemic. And he was 65, which is rare in men because you guys don't have periods. So then I was like, okay, we'll call him Joe. Joe, we need to figure out, we need to up your protein. We need to get you eating some vegetables. This man had never done any sort of dietary change in his life. And so I just worked on his protein. So he's got his protein up closer to about 100 grams a day, which is great. We spread it equally throughout there. We replaced his refined carbohydrates with vegetables or complex carbohydrates like brown rice and quinoa and lentils and those types of things. And then he started exercising, and it wasn't a huge thing. And it was funny because he was really worried about the finances of seeing me. So he called me before and he said, how many appointments do you think I'll need to get well? I said 4.
Okay. That ain't a lot.
I said 4. We got 4. And so he's one of my favorites that I can remember because I don't work with a ton of cardiac because that's really Jordyn's expertise. But it was so cool because his doctor, who told him to go vegan and vegetarian, which loved her to death, but that was the wrong move for him.
Yeah.
And I upped his fats. I got in healthy fats. We replaced his cooking oils from canola oil to avocado oil and olive oil. His numbers completely reversed. He was like a totally different person. And it was so interesting to him because he was like, after his first appointment, he goes, oh my gosh, all I'm doing, Karmen, is exercising, grocery shopping, and cooking. And I said, well, it's a steep learning curve. And then he said, it just became, that was my life, and these foods that I used to consume weren't even foods anymore, and completely reversed. And now he's like, I have enough energy, I'm keeping up with my grandkids and doing all these things. And in 4 appointments, and this man, I'm convinced he will be. And it was so cute because when he left, he goes, Karmen, you completely changed my life with just food. And he really did it. It's just that educational tool. And that's the issue with conventional medicine. What Jordyn runs up against is she's trying to make sure they don't die and doesn't have time to consult them on nutrition to make sure. And really at that point, it might decrease their coronary artery disease, but it's not going to reverse it. Yeah. And this guy was probably like maybe 5 years out from a heart attack. And he was able to reverse it and gain the tools and felt really, I think the coolest thing is when I see my patients feel comfortable and confident at making their own decisions without me. And so they've got the tools, he's good to go, and he moved forward and probably decreased not having to see Jordyn in the hospital in a decade.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say is, that would be a preventative case. I don't know if Jordyn saves people's lives all the time in the hospital.
Yeah, to be totally straight, by the time people meet my particular team, they're pretty far down the path. But there are people who, I've seen people who have quit smoking. I've seen people quit drinking, and people get their blood sugar and their heart, or their blood pressure and their blood sugar under control and feel much better for a long period of time. And you may at that point not be reversing the disease per se, but you're kind of trying to park it. I always tell people, it's like, let's just park it here in this lot and leave it here as long as we can.
Don't go any further
let's
down.
not go further. Yeah. We don't want to drive down the road anymore. We're going to pull over on this scenic overview and stay here for as long as possible. Okay. So I have, it is possible. the hard part is, and I think this is where Karmen and I are hoping to help more people, is the coaching side of it. Like, because I can sit in an office and tell you this all day, but then you have to go home and do it.
So there's no follow through, perhaps.
Yeah, and so that's, I think, one of the things that we really want to be able to help people with is, and women especially, is that follow through. Like when a question comes up and you're like, oh, I have to wait till 3 more months to see that doctor who told me these things, you know, instead they can just send us a message and one of us can get back to them and help guide them along the way. So.
Or figure out like what their lifestyle is, and it might not be the perfect prescriptive. I think a lot of doctors have lots of well-intended nutrition advice, and they've, you know, I've been a nutritionist or a dietitian for 10 years, and all I do is talk about food and what that looks like in people's lives. And so they'll say, oh my gosh, well, you need to reduce your fat. Well, they don't know, should I reduce all fat? Should I not eat any fat? Like,
what type of fat?
And then they're, you know, and the doctor's saying that as they, you know, wisp out the door.
Yeah.
And so.
Which is so true. That's like one of the big reasons why I like wanted to step back and do this with Karmen, is because the modern medical model does not leave room for time for that. For people to like ponder what you have just said to them and then ask questions. They have to come back, you know?
I see.
So,
And I, like, one of my favorite questions is I'll go through with a patient. We saw 2 this morning, we're gonna see 2 this afternoon, is, you know, these are kind of my recommendations. This is what we've implemented. What kind of barriers did you see? Is there something, you know, what do you struggle with? So like our morning patient, she's like, weekends are really hard for me. My family's eating this certain way. How can I eat this way? Okay, well, let's figure out maybe not perfect alternative, but good alternatives that feel normal, and she's not making 2 separate meals. You know, there's so many different social determinants of health that a lot of nutritionists and dietitians and physicians are the worst with it, of like, there's all of these different things that have to come into play, whether it be socioeconomic status, timing, you know, lifestyle, what does their family life look like, environment, access, accessibility, that really set the stage for what people are able to do. And if you don't have a conversation about that, you don't know how to help them.
Yeah.
So that's really where public health and legislature and all of that kind of stuff really comes on the broad spectrum of how do we get everybody healthier, which we don't know how to do that either. So we're on the grassroots. But I think when you're able to talk about nutrition and lifestyle, you can really learn your patient really well, so that you know, oh my gosh, they're not taking their statin medication. Well, they just had a baby. How can we make this easier? If this certain medication or supplement they have to take 3 to 4 times a day, well, that's not going to work with their lifestyle. They're not going to take it at all. So even though this isn't a perfect administration of this medication or supplement, how can we make it so that they're actually taking it, doable, and what's going to move the needle the fastest forward?
Yeah, for sure.
I think one takeaway from this talk might be, if people choose to work with you folks at Selkirk, or whether they find a community of people, whether it be professionals or just educated people, whether it be my channel, whatever it is, that you find a community with which you can follow up once in a while and elevate each other. That's what I like about what you're doing, both of you.
Yeah.
Well, and I think just having the more, and I mean, when we talk about social determinants of health, I'm sure you've heard of the blue zones and these healthier, you know, the healthier people that you surround yourself with, the healthier you will become. And so I think the more that people, I mean, that's kind of how you all got started, Dave, is just kind of being interested in having these conversations is, you know, what are you doing? And then also taking that and discerning all of this information, because we're in this information era. Everybody can find whatever pretty much me and Jordyn have in our brains, but how do you know how to filter that and discern what's going to be best for you?
We want to be a funnel for that stuff. Get it from this to this.
To this and a lot of people have trial and error, or it's like, or, you know, they have good healthcare providers like ourselves that are able to say like, you know, or say like intermittent fasting, like that's great for this population, or what does that look like in this? How does that work for you? And does that really feel like it? And I think it's less about taking all this information and saying like, this is the gold standard, but how is your body interpreting that information, whether we have blood markers on that or just your lived experience in your body on the symptoms it's giving your, you know, back to you and telling you. And I think it's so cool because with Jordyn's explanation of the heart on how it overcompensates, it shows that your body is really for you and is always trying to protect you to its greatest amount. So when we believe our body's for you, we can start to view our body through the lens of it probably does know what we need most, as long as we can use all these different metrics, and then we, have people kind of trust their own intuition of how does that feel in your body, and does that make you feel good, and overall.
I love that, seeing your body as your ally that loves you and cares for you.
Yes,
really
always.
You're not alone.
Yeah.
That's sweet.
It's very apparent. I mean, I think anybody who takes care of people
Mm-hmm.
in a health or medicine fashion, you can't, that's an undeniable fact that your body is definitely trying to save you from yourself.
Well, and it's a cool fact because we see it as healthcare providers, but also our system views the body as broken. And so I think in integrative and functional medicine, we really think of it as your body's imbalanced right now and it's overcompensating. You have this array of different symptoms that are showing you or trying to tell you like, oh my gosh, we're so out of balance. Please help us. And if you're not listening, it will then show the progression of disease. But I don't ever see my patients as broken or, as their bodies are in contrast with themselves, but that we're just kind of finding them. But I think the modern day medical model has told us that we're broken without these experts that are telling us what to do or what have you. And instead of, healthcare providers really being in partnership and saying like we're working with you on trying to get your body back into balance instead of from this hierarchist kind of standpoint.
It's all about homeostasis.
All about homeostasis.
Thank you. Thank you. This is good.
Yeah.
I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Jordyn, Karmen.
Yeah.
Very, very nice.
Yeah. Thank you.
I invite you to join the conversation with myself and other men and what we're all doing to find that inner savage and bring them to life, not only for our benefit, but for the benefit of those around us, people we care about. All right, man, stay strong.